What can I say? Starting by saying that I'm the publisher of this book. No, I'm not just the publisher of this book. Please sit down.
No, I mean...
You won't. I mean, she is quite a lady, I have to say. I never know what to expect next. She's surprising me constantly since she arrived last Tuesday. Surprising me by showing how much interest there is for Esther Perel in Sweden. I'm amazed, really amazed by all people who have been contacting us constantly since they've heard that you are coming to Stockholm, Esther. Now, what am I? I'm a very, very, very proud publisher of Esther Perel. I've been dreaming of publishing you for many years, being terribly annoyed by the fact that somebody else did publish your first book, and that book, of course, became very, very much the talk of the town. The book was called Mating in Captivity and was absolutely fantastic read. Since then, I've been watching what's going on. Why is she not writing something new so I can at least get a new chance? And there it came. The book was the fact. I've heard about it last year, more than 1 year ago, and immediately asked if it was possible to publish Esther Perel. So who is Esther Perel? For me, a fascinating psychotherapist who has been specialized in relationships for many, many years. One of these role models, one of these people who are doing something completely different, completely new for years, thinking that there are other answers than many other people have been finding in relationships. So after reading the Mating in Captivity, I've been following what was happening with whatever you've been doing, and reading the articles, lots of them. I mean, the articles in New York Times and the Guardian and the Le Monde and lots of the press. Following what was happening around your work as a researcher, as a human being, very, very interesting one, and finding that the audience of your research has been enormous, getting huge especially the last years. So I was very happy to hear that there was a book coming about infidelity, and this is what this book is called. In English, it's called. Has a genius title of The State of Affairs. It was impossible to translate into Swedish, so we have chosen the title which is Kärlekskris, crisis, in love crisis, you can say. And how to go on after infidelity, called Gå vidare efter otrohet. The book was a big happening when it came last year in US, and then all the translations came, and with them lots of discussions and lots of interest, not only for the book, for the books and the work of Esther, but also for what was going on with your podcast. And this podcast called Where Should We Begin became some phenomenon. Now we've been talking for a few days with Esther about this podcast, now finding almost millions of listeners, and you can tell us something about it. But you are here to talk, and I'm not the one to take the space and the time. I just wanted to make you aware that you are a unique audience, meeting Esther Perel publicly like that. Nobody has done it. You have been talking to media quite a lot, I have to say, all kinds of media. And I'm fascinated by the fact that not only the interest from the media, but the huge interest of the listeners you have in this country as well. Lots of them. I keep hearing from people, young people and older people, from women and men. It feels like a volcano called Esther Perel is going to explode any moment. So welcome, Esther. You are a volcano in my publishing life.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, and also joining a very illustrious list of authors that are published by Bromberg. It's like you enter the pantheon. You're not just an author. Just by sheer company, you get elevated. But let me just get a quick sense before we start this whole conversation. How many of you are familiar with my work? Okay. How many of you are completely new to me and just kind of stumbled here? It's great. Okay. So let me kind of contextualize this for you. I think if you see me if I sit, everybody? You good? Okay. I'm going to introduce you to my office. I'm a couples therapist. I have worked for 35 years as a couples therapist and a family therapist. Couples therapy has existed not much longer. And part of why it became so central is because this is the first time in the history of humankind that the survival of the family depends basically on the happiness of the couple. That's it. That's why there is couples therapy at the level that it exists today. Until now, until that happened, family continued, people made sacrifices to preserve the family, generally women made sacrifices to preserve the family. And anyway, you married once, you get stuck for life, and if you didn't like it, you could just hope for an early death of your partner, not of you. Basically that was it. You were stuck. And once you could leave, everything shifted. Once we brought love into marriage, once we brought sex to love, once we equated marriage with the pursuit of happiness, once we lifted our needs, like on the Maslow ladder, from marriage for survival and food and shelter, to marriage for belonging and romantic love, to marriage for self-actualization, i.e. you're going to help me become the best version of myself, infidelity changed its meaning completely. So can we go to the next slide and just do the prologue?
Uh-huh. Nick?
Yep, that's it. Exactly.
Yep. Come on.
We are trying that before today.
Okay,
Yes.
I let you try and I continue in the meantime. Let me ask you a question. If I ask you, and don't answer me right away, if you have been affected by the experience of infidelity in your life, either because you are the child of a parent who was unfaithful, or a parent who left to be with somebody else, either because you are yourself the child of an illicit love, either because you are the friend that somebody's been weeping on you for months, or because you are the confidant of someone who's in the thralls of one, or because you are or have been one of the three protagonists of the adulterous triangle. Have you been affected by the experience of infidelity in your life? Raise your hand. All right. Now, you front row, but you can take a look. This story, come on, raise your hands again. You don't say anything, so that's all. There's just very few who are not. Because infidelity is a societal story, it is systemic, it is intergenerational, and it is usually presented as the drama of two people when it is actually not. It is also often presented as the drama of one good person and one innocent person, one victim and one perpetrator, and it is not. It is often presented in simple terms as in get out, why don't you just leave? If you're not happy enough, if you're unhappy enough to cheat, you're unhappy enough to leave. If you've been cheated on, you leave. Leaving has become the answer to this whole drama. Who is the book for? It is for anybody who's ever loved.
What's it like to be someone's disappointment for 20-something years?
It's hard.
Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel is an Audible original series, bringing you into the office of the iconic relationship therapist as she counsels real couples on modern love.
You can both tell me all kinds of things, and I can listen to each of you. I'm married to none of you, so it's very easy. But you need to reach each other.
These 10 anonymous couples have chosen to share their most intimate and unscripted conversations.
When I was going to the bathroom, and I was burying my face in a towel and biting it, and howling and crying, frustrated.
Esther helps each couple put words to things they felt but didn't quite know how to say.
Sometimes I treat you poorly because I see him as an extension of...
Him is not here, you are here.
Because I see you as an extension of me.
Together we're gonna aim for a different conversation, a different exchange.
Okay. How do I do that?
I will try to help you.
So, where should we begin?
When people used to live in the village, basically the walls were quite porous and everybody knew what was going on in the neighbor's house. But today, we have a situation that is fantastic. On the one hand, we have never experienced and expected more from romantic love than we do today. We have a level of isolation on the front of relationships that we have never known before. We need to have conversations about things that people never had to talk about, and nobody really knows how to do it. And so the idea of actually giving voice to these people and to create a public health campaign on relationships, we want from one person what we used to ask from an entire village. And we have no role models for this. You know, I've been interviewed the whole day. They had 6 interviews today and another 6 yesterday, Skavlan included. And systematically, one of the questions has been around why this book? Why to write about infidelity? So I kind of summarized it in 3 points. You know, I write about modern love. I write about modern relationships. What is happening? That, you know, if you look at friendship, it hasn't changed too much in the last 100 years. If you look at sibling relationship, it hasn't changed too much. Parent-children relationship have fundamentally shifted. But there is one relationship that has literally undergone an extreme makeover, and that's the couple. Nothing to compare with your grandparents, from the beginning to the end, and everything in between. So that's the first thing, is that this, and then, you know, we come from models of relationships that were quite clear. I've been in Sweden a number of times. I remember when I began coming here in the early 90s, you know, basically relationships were regulated by hierarchies, by rules, by religious institutions, earlier than that, I would say, and by obligations. Everybody knew what to expect. People knew how to talk to young people knew how to treat adults, husbands knew what they could ask from their wives, and wives knew what they should never tell their husbands. It's it. It was very clear. This model of relationship organized around duty and rules and obligation has shifted to relationships by design. It's IDEO for relationships. It's this idea that we have the choice and the options to define what we want. But for that, we need to know what we want. And for that, we need to feel deserving to know what we want. And for that, we need the information. And that's where this whole series of books and podcasts come into play. There is this crisis called infidelity. It has never had the impact that it has today. And it has everything to do with the fact that the relationship model, the romantic ideal, has completely transformed the meaning of infidelity. If you live in a patriarchal model where basically men have a license to cheat and women are bound to the house, then when you ask me, how do you affair-proof a marriage, I say in the past it was very simple. She doesn't have a car. She doesn't have her own money. She doesn't have an option to leave. She doesn't keep her children if she goes. You bet that the marriage is affair-proofed. But that is a very particular system. Now there are no walls. She has a car. She too can go to a conference, etc., etc. She may even have her own money. Here it's a given. It's not a given in many other parts of the world. But now it's all internally regulated. The boundaries come from inside. And the boundaries that depend on the vagaries of the human heart are much more feeble and much more fragile than excommunication or destitution or scarlet letters. That's one thing. The second is, so there is this crisis, it has an impact it never had. It has become one of the leading causes of divorce in the West. When was that ever the situation? That was it. It happened. And it encompasses the entire human drama. The story of infidelity is the story of literature. You take out the books on infidelity and you have very few books left in the fiction world. It's about love and lust and passion and betrayal and lying and secrecy and deception and duplicity and jealousy and possessiveness and vengeance and God knows what else. And usually the only other place where you find that entire canvas is in the opera. But not in psychology. So I wrote a book about modern relationship by looking at one of the main crises that happens today in modern relationship in order to explore a host of pieces of what we experience today, what we expect today, how we pursue our happiness, what we do when we stray, what it is like to feel betrayed today, and what it is like when we choose to stay, when we actually have the option to leave. Something that is a very new situation. And that's the frame of this book. I basically, first and foremost, try to understand what, if the new model of committed relationships, gay or straight doesn't really matter in this world, in this point. Most of you probably met and will meet your partners, or one of them anyway, in your late 20s, maybe early 30s, not in your late teens. Which means that you will have had 10 or 15 years of relationship experience, of relational and sexual nomadism. A kind of nomadism that has utterly, fundamentally redefined the word monogamy. Most of history, and in many parts of the world, monogamy is one person for life. In this country, monogamy is one person at a time. One person at a time allows everybody to say, I am monogamous in all my relationships, plural. And this is supposed to make sense. Same word, completely different reality. The conversation about non-monogamy today matches the conversation about virginity 60 years ago, which was the first time people understood that monogamy was going to change its meaning. Now when you pick me at my most authentic. I've already developed my personality, my identity, my vision for life, my purpose, my profession, whatever. You choose me for who I am in recognition for the hard work that I have done in that project of self-definition called me, and vice versa. And for that, you will stop having sex with others. We used to marry and have sex for the first time, but now we marry and we stop having sex with others. Exclusivity means something very different. And you, therefore, make me feel that I'm the one and only, so special, so unique, with whom you can experience wholeness and mystery and ecstasy and meaning and all the stuff that people basically used to find in the realm of the divine. All of that channeled into one new religion called romanticism. Mm-hmm. You bet when that person cheats on you, you are destroyed. You don't just say, this is what people do. You say, this wasn't meant to happen. This was not part of my story. I don't recognize myself as a character in a play that I never auditioned for. And then you have a crisis of identity, and then you have a crisis of trust at a level that you've never experienced, because I trusted you for everything. You're my best friend, you're my trusted confidant, you're my passionate lover, you're my economic partner, you're my co-parent, you're my intellectual equal, you're a lot of things for me, and you do this to me, what is left of me? And then you shatter the grand ambition of love. That's it. Will I ever be able to connect with anybody again? It's as if your whole definition of love has just been thrown out. This is not universal, and this is not historical. This is a new meaning to the experience of infidelity that then makes people say, you have to leave. How do you recover from such a thing? And yet, if that many people in this room have experienced a variation of this story, then there needs to be more than can be done than just get out. There's a lot at stake. Marriages or relationships are not just the story of two people. They're intricate systems of multiple relationships that feed off these two people. So I decided there needs to be a better way. There needs to be a new conversation. There needs to be something that isn't just so simplistically black and white judgmental. Judgmental as if those are the bad people. Foucault used to say every society has a colony of leopards. So the infidels, they're the leopards. Now it's the Me Too. It's always another leopard, but there's always a leopard. The one who embodies the impurity of society, the stuff that stands to destroy the social order. And the social order of marriage gets destroyed, or of committed relationship gets destroyed with this event. Why do people cheat? The majority of the people that come to my office are not chronic philanderers. They exist, but that book has been written. The compulsive, the narcissist, the addict, the unfaithful, the womanizer, the slut, you name them. They have all kinds of names, not a single one is neutral. But what's interesting is the majority of people have been together 10, 15, 20 years. And then one day they cross that line that they never imagined they would cross. For what? Why would people risk destroying everything they have built? For what? Somebody has to ask that question. Not what did you do there? Who cares if it was vertical or horizontal? Why did this happen? Why now? What did it mean for you? What am I supposed to do with this? What will this do to us? What will we tell? How does this change the story of our life and of our relationship? That becomes a very different, compelling proposition. So I thought some affairs will of course break a relationship. That's it, it's the death knell. How many people have told me, I wanted to leave for years, but then when the partner cheated, they finally get the legitimacy to do it. Because now it's your fault. It's not me leaving, it's me doing what I'm supposed to do to what you've done to me. You know what I'm talking about. That's one, there are many, many, many narratives. We will maybe mention 10 tonight, and there are hundreds of them. But what does it mean when I find out more and more and more? This is 10 years of research. 1,500 letters came in from the TED Talk alone. And you know who writes to you? The people don't have the permission to talk publicly. The man who brags doesn't write to you. The man who's been betrayed and can't talk about it to anybody, he writes. The woman who cheats, she can't talk to you. In most parts of the world, in 9 countries in the world, she can still be killed. So she doesn't talk. But she writes to you. And she writes, and I promise you, these are not Twitter lines. It's more than 140 characters what people send me. It's months of reading these letters. And then began the practice where I decided I would just see couples with infidelity. That's all I would see for a while. So I can really immerse myself into this labyrinth and see what are the many, many themes. So let's play. Well, I've had better. This was the wrong prologue, but that you don't know.
And did you have good sex with me before we got married?
Yeah.
Did you?
It was good enough.
The enough is
It
what
was
makes the
good.
difference, right?
But I don't know, for the most part it was good.
Same one.
I've had better. But I didn't think that would be so important.
Before we had kids, before we were married, and it was totally different. I also didn't like the 5 minutes of sex. It was terrible.
Why did you do it?
Why did you? You did
I
it
didn't
'cause
plan.
You
for
thought
5
that's what I
minutes.
need to give him.
No,
And
no.
he did it because he thought that's what I
I
can
don't
get.
think it's true. I didn't want it to be 5 minutes, but he was done in 5 minutes and gone.
And then nobody said, stay.
He's tired. I'm tired. I want to go to sleep. He doesn't want to have sex at night. He wants to have sex in the morning. It can be like a long romantic sex in the morning, right? Why not rent a hotel and start with that?
To me, like when you are renting a hotel in your city to have sex, I just can't do it like
You
that.
did it with the girl.
It wasn't that. It was more about just the excitement of.
All right, let me stop you a second, people. Because you don't tell him much, he doesn't tell you much. You let this thing degrade, both of you. You're a year into the discovery of the affair, and so we're not in the crisis mode. We're not. But the second phase is what I call the insight. It is the meaning making. Why did this happen? How did this happen? What did it mean for you? What did you find there? It's a both hand. It's what happened to you and what happened to us. And what can we learn from it? And how did we allow ourselves to enter a place where we both were quite unhappy? Neither of us really felt the other person is going to hear it, is going to take it, is going to receive it, just like that, without instantly switching into a blame mode, blame and defense. That's the conversation I hear you trying to have. It doesn't really matter if it's around sex or around something else. The form is the same. Once you have this kind of pattern, just about every conversation will go in the same direction.
So people mind the meanings and the motives of their affairs in all kinds of grounds. Sometimes it is because relationships suffer massive neglect. You will find that often the best of you goes to your friends, goes to your work, goes to your customers, and the leftovers come home. That's it. It's like a cactus that you just think will survive on its own. But a relationship that survives is not a relationship that thrives, and a relationship that's not dead doesn't mean it is alive. And aliveness is the one word all over the world that people talk to me about. They don't talk about sex, they don't talk about all of that, they talk about how they felt alive. Affairs are about transgression. Here, everybody in the interviews kept talking about cheating, but there's a different piece at stake. So of course, constant resentments and chronic bickering and fights and neglect and indifference and sexual frustration and complete mismatch and closeted lives and all of those things are some of the reasons why people may cheat. But the majority of the time, that story has been told as well. What is less told is the people that come and say, I love my partner, I love my life, I'm having an affair. That became much more interesting. Why do happy people cheat? What does it mean when people tell me, you know, it wasn't that I wanted to leave my husband, my wife, my boyfriend. What I wanted to leave is what I had become. That's a whole other story. And what I had become was a truncated version of myself. Can't remember who I once was. It's not that I wanted to find a new person, it's that I wanted to refine various parts of me that I lost somewhere along the way that I don't even know when it was. When's the last time I thought of me? I've been wife, I've been husband, I've been caregiver, I've been mother, I've had kids, I've had a disabled kid, I've had an aging parent, I've had Alzheimer here, you name it. This is my first time I've actually done something for me. This is where I don't have to plead or beg. This is where someone actually wants me. This is where some place actually is interested in. This is a place, you know, when you're with your lover, it is very rare that you talk and that they are texting in the meantime. You get their full attention. You get their presence. But that's not what you get at home, you know. Except once this has happened, suddenly people are beyond present because they stand to lose everything. It's not pretty, you know. So that notion of what is this dual perspective around infidelity, of what it did to you and what it meant for me. You know, the betrayal, the lies, the deception, the secret, but also the longing and the loss and the yearning and the aliveness. And the fact that affairs are erotic plots, basically. They are erotic stories, but not erotic in the sense of sex, erotic in the sense of desire. You can have plenty of desire with sex that is imagined without having to do squat. That's why we have an erotic mind. We're the only ones who can have phenomenal sex for hours in our mind, have blissful orgasms and never touch anybody. That is the difference between sex and eroticism. It's the poetics of it. People can have sex and feel nothing. Women have done that for centuries, and men for that matter, everybody. So this becomes a whole new story. You know, what does it mean when it is about the relationship, and what does it mean when it has nothing to do with the relationship? I was asked today, do you need to tell? I said the question about do you need to tell has everything to do with where you are. If you're in Tehran, you're going to have a different answer than if you're in Stockholm. If you're a 60-year-old woman, you're going to have a different answer than if you're a 28-year-old. If you have a disabled child, if you are economically dependent, if you stand to have violence, if you stand to lose your children, you're going to have a different answer. Transparency is beautiful in what we call pseudo-egalitarian societies, but where there is no equality. Before you talk, you need to think about the consequences of talking. It's the same for other things you talk about. You know, what other questions I'm telling you the things I've been talking about the whole day. But ask me, let's talk together maybe, or ask me. Okay? I think I've kind of warmed us up enough, right? We're primed, as we say. Can I ask you something, people? How many of you are currently in a relationship? And how many of you would like to be in a relationship? And how many of you would like to be out of the relationship you're in, at least on occasion? Some honesty. Okay, so let's talk.
Maybe it's a surprise with the questions, so we are a little ashamed.
You know, I when I go to Norway, you know what happens? I teach for 3 days and it goes like this. And I have no idea if it means this is fascinating or I'm bored out of my mind. You know, and 3 days later, suddenly the feedback arrives. So we don't have 3 days. Yes. Go ahead.
What do you think that the new dating scenarios we have with apps and Tinders and so on, how does this affect marriage in the future? People are so restless. They just open up and get a new one and a new one and a new one.
Right.
There's no one has
Repeat.
Yes, what is the influence of the dating apps on our roaming desires, right? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to address this question. I will start by saying this. We have no more desires than our grandparents used to have. But we feel more entitled to pursue our desires than the generations before had. Because we live in an era that promotes individual fulfillment and satisfaction and pursuit of happiness. And in the name of that, we divorce. In the name of that, we say, I want my children to see me happy. Wouldn't they want to see mommy happy? In the name of that, we think, what else is out there? Now, FOMO, fear of missed opportunities, or missing out, the same idea, you know, is part of us, but has always been a part of us, in a sense that we would ask, you know, what would my life have been if I had stayed with John? But today, I can actually find John. I can go on with Facebook, I don't just have to go on my apps, and I can find out what happened to John, Johan. Translate him, make him Swedish for a minute. You know, whatever happened? You know, did he remember me too? At the time in college or in high school, you know, whatever happened with him and that woman or that man that he then ended up with, and etc., etc. And now you kind of can go and see what would happen if I went back to the novel of my life and I actually wrote a different chapter. And that is something that has never been. Then the simple proliferation of options, you know, on the one hand, you love the choice. On the other hand, you dread the paradox of choice. On the one hand, you love to know that there is another possibility for you. On the other hand, it comes with a level of self-doubt and uncertainty. Am I happy? Am I happy enough? Could I be happier? You know, we used to leave marriages or relationships because we were unhappy. Today, we leave them because we could be happier. That's a whole new threshold. And this is in every aspect of our society. The apps find their meaning in that culture. They don't exist outside, you know, in a vacuum, the apps. And, you know, sometimes people just swipe, not because they really want to do something, but they just want to see what is out there, you know, what else could be there for me, and who would want me, or you're not interested in me, you know, you have not looked at me in God knows how long, you know, here, I have 13, you know, but, you know, we also know that you can have hundreds of swipes and only one conversation. It's a very nice article in the Atlantic Monthly of this month that touches on the app situation. In any event, the apps or no apps, the fact is that at this moment, the boundaries, the lines that you cross or don't cross, are basically still a negotiation that you have with yourself. The model that the heterosexual world has had is proclaimed monogamy and clandestine adultery. Everybody negotiates monogamy, but generally with themselves. Covert. All right, now we got the figures going. Go.
What's your take on polygamy?
On polygamy or polyamory?
Both, I guess.
Okay, go ahead. I'm going to collect a bunch of
Oh,
questions.
yeah. How do you think
So what's my take on polygamy and on polyamory, which are two completely different systems, but yeah.
What's your suggestion how you as a couple should talk about these matters before this is on the
Yes.
table? If you're back to the reasons for infidelity, that you don't feel seen or whatever,
Right.
how do you express that or talk about it in the beginning of the relationship?
How do you talk about the questions of the dissatisfaction in your relationship, but also the questions around the boundaries in the relationship before, as we say in beautiful English, the shit hits the fan? Yes.
In your first book, you write about like how I think it was about hookup culture and how that actually has a lot to do with American Puritanism, which in a way seems strange. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, in a way, this overtly sexy modernity we live in is also very empty of eroticism in some sort of deeper way.
So can I talk about how market economics have influenced our sexual attitudes?
Yeah.
Yes, is it one? In a way, that's a short. Is that a shorthand for the question? How, you know, how promiscuity does not necessarily connote a more comfortable approach to sexuality. It can also actually bespeak a certain kind of anxiety and Puritan mentality. So I will come back to that as well. Any others?
There is one in the back.
Yeah?
Is it me? All right.
Yeah?
Okay. I have a question. I watched your TED Talk for a couple of years ago about the infidelity, and that you said something about that men cheat to stay in a relationship and women cheat to leave a relationship. That is a sentence that actually stuck with me, and I would like you to elaborate on that.
Right. Okay. I don't think I ever said that, but I'd love the question anyway. Okay, let's go a little bit in order. So, look, people, polygamy is basically a mainstay of patriarchy. It's a system in which men are allowed to have more women. And of course, it comes with the fact that they need to be able to provide for those women, and in order to be able to have multiple wives, so it becomes an assertion of their power, of their economic success, etc., etc. Polygamy is basically a power system. It's a structure that traditional societies, some traditional societies, have adopted for a long time. Polyamory is a whole different story. Polyamory is in many ways an attempt to recreate a communal living, actually. And to understand that this idea that you're going to have one person to give you what once a whole village used to give is maybe problematic. And so you recreate a village. But today, you integrate sexuality as part of that village. Sometimes. Not all polyamory is so sexual. But it does say that there are multiple loves. And that there are it's an extended family. It often involves a caretaking if there are children involved by more than two adults. And what it really talks about is the notion that that maybe we actually have the ability to love more than one person at a time. Not just sequentially, as in the serial monogamy that the West is currently involved with, but as in simultaneously, and that you love these people differently, and that it doesn't have to be a threat necessarily, that it is an economy of addition, that you don't emphasize relationship through their exclusiveness, but you emphasize relationships through their uniqueness. What is special that I have with you that is different from what we share together? And with you, I raise my children. And I would never want to raise my children with you because that's absolutely not what you are about. But with you, I can travel and I can have creative exchanges, etc., that I don't have with you. And it's that kind of thing. It's actually what people often will end up doing in their covert lives as well. But this is an official model. It's a consensual model. It's a model that can only exist if both people have equal power or equal say or equal decision-making power. It cannot involve coercion. It cannot involve intimidation. It can't be done just to prevent the other person from leaving. Go sleep with other people, you know. I just don't want to know about it. This is not the story. So polyamory is part of the entrepreneurial model of thinking on relationships. It's a gig economy. In a way, it's a gig mentality applied to relationships. Think of it what you want, but there is, and what is absolutely clear is that polyamorous couples are high communicators. You have to be able to talk a lot. They negotiate a lot. They spend sometimes more time talking about the model than living the model, you know, because it demands real acuity and sensitivity to the responses of the other, and modulation and responding and adjusting to what happens when people are engaged with each other. When people ask, you know, and do they work, etc., etc., I spent 20 years working with mixed couples, interracial, intercultural, interreligious couples, before I ever touched this body of work. And at the time, people used to say, mixed marriages can't work. Can't work, you know. Marriage is difficult enough. You don't need two religions, two races, two nationalities, two languages, two cultures, etc., etc. And at the time already, this has fundamentally changed, of course, but at the time, it was very clear, those who will succeed will be better than all the others. But not that many people can climb Mount Olympus. But those who do have probably qualities of relationships and abilities to negotiate and abilities to deal with difference and regard uniqueness that is unmatched. Okay, so then how do you have the difficult conversation? You know, I don't think your grandparents ever had to talk about if they want kids. Therefore your parents, therefore you. Because it was just simply like this. If you happen to have sex, you probably would get pregnant at some point, and hopefully you didn't die from it. That was it. When did people suddenly start to ask, do we want children? When would you like to have children? How many children would you like to have? What would you do if your child only had one this or one that, or not enough of this? Or would you abort? Would you, do you want to do genetic testing? No genetic. Can you believe this? This is so normal to us that we should have this conversation, right? But it wasn't always like this. And well, it's the same thing about what do we do with the fact that we have desires for others? I mean, what do you really think? You've been roaming around for years and then one day you find me and you've become blind to the rest of the world? Why do we want to just suddenly play naive and dumb? Now, that doesn't mean you're going to act on it. But if at least the conversation is possible, that's already a little bit of air coming in. Then people say, you need to talk. If you're not happy, if you're frustrated, if you don't. This is all very, very important. Of course, that's much of the work I do. But I'm also very clear that many times people have talked. Sometimes they haven't said a word, they just take it, and one day they poop. But many times they have talked. They've tried to explain. I need more of this. Stop working all the time. Don't drink so much. Look at me once in a while. Put your freaking phone down. Touch me. Don't just stroke your phone before going to bed and the first thing when you wake up in the morning. I'm actually there and I'm a human body, etc., etc. And the people don't listen. It's very nice to just say, you should have talked about it first. I've met way too many people who talked a lot, and the only time their partner finally listened is when there was something at stake. Unfortunately, because I don't want to deal with this. I know you're frustrated. I know I've been saying no to you for the past 6 years. Really? Just leave me alone. Deal with it. You know I've been taking care of it, whatever the reasons. Whatever the reasons. But it is an unbelievable thing how much people talk about things once there is less at stake, and that's it. It's all up for grabs now. And have a level of honesty that they never had before. And how much the same person who has been so sexually, for example, disinterested for years, I'm not talking months, people, years, find it suddenly that they are voraciously interested in their partner. Like that. No hormones can do this. It's not pretty. But this story happens to other people shut down. I mean, you can have both, you know. About hookup and Puritanism. I mean, look, you have in common with the US the Protestant heritage. You have different, but you have a whole different kind of attitude towards sexuality, but you're still quite different from the Latins and the Catholics. So I think what happens in the States is unique. Is unique. I basically started this entire body of work because I wrote some stupid little article in the year 2000 about the Clinton scandal. And we are now at the 20th anniversary of the Clinton affair. And I just couldn't believe, why was America so bent out of shape for transgression and so tolerant of multiple divorces? You can go around and say, I've been divorced 3 times. Nobody blinks an eye. That was not what I came from. But you transgressed once a cheater, always a cheater. That was that. Where does that come from? And then I started to study what is the profound anti-hedonism of American culture. It's not just around sex. It's around America is focused on control. Self-control, self-sufficiency, self, but controlled. God forbid you lose control, you know. Dependency is a loss of control. Everything can become loss of control. Well, sex is a loss of control. It is a surrender. So what do people do? They drink. They drink in order to have sex. And I'm like, you know, if you like mountain climbing, would you want to remember the next day where you were yesterday? If you go on a motorcycle, would you want to be so freaking drunk that you can't judge where you drive? Or would you actually want to know that you can stay on the road? That you know what you're doing? If you need to be checked out in order to do this thing, you have some real conflict about this thing, which you're not being honest about with yourself, individually and as a culture. That's where the hookup piece comes in. It's not, the hookup is just the model of now. I mean, boomers were no less or no more promiscuous than millennials. But the notion that there's a fundamental anxiety about it, because it's a surrender. And a surrender comes with a certain kind of dependence, and a dependence comes with a certain kind of attachment. And there's a series of things that happen, even if it's just a night. But you can have a nice short story. The notion of disaffiliating from it, of taking yourself out of the equation, it happened but it wasn't me, is to me not disconnected from the harassment. Because the next morning you wake up and you say, that wasn't me. And if it wasn't me, then it was you. It was somebody who made me do something that I didn't really want. Do you understand? I'm connecting a few dots here, but this is, you know, one of the ways I'm trying to understand this. The story about the men who stay and the women who go. Look, I think it's a little more complex than that. You know, it goes this way. Traditionally, the notion has been that men stray because they are non-monogamous by nature. They are natural roamers, they are conquistadors, they don't like to get bored, and they love variety. And women cheat because they are lonely and hungry for intimacy, and therefore they must be really miserable to do such a thing. And therefore, if they do it, it's because they're on their way out. But you can't really take this like that, because the consequences for cheating have never been the same. If the consequences were the same on both ends, then you could know what does woman really want. What we know is that woman has usually done what she should. And in still most parts of the world, she does what she has to. She does what keeps her safe and secure. She doesn't follow her desires, even though her desires may be not that different from his. What we know is that men in committed relationship, in straight relationships, will stay rather interested in their partner for a long time. They may want more, but they stay connected to the person they're with. Whereas we know that women's desire in committed relationship goes down rather plummeting. What have we done with that finding? We've said women are less interested in sex. What should we have done with that finding? Women are less interested in the sex they can have. It's not worth it. In order to want sex, it needs to be sex that is worth wanting. Women get bored with monogamy much sooner than men. But we've interpreted it as she's less interested in the thing itself, rather than in the quality of the thing that she's about to have. When she's ridden with monotony, routine, caretaking, motherhood, wifehood, and all of these de-eroticizing roles in her life, it takes her a lot more to get reconnected to her erotic self. So that's more what's in the background of this thing. Both men and women, straight or gay, may sometimes stray because it's an exit strategy, and sometimes stray because it's a way of actually preserving their relationships. I don't think there's a difference in either of them. Some affairs are there to stabilize a relationship, to add a dimension that is missing, but without wanting to leave the entire thing. However, affairs for women more often carry the theme of autonomy than for men. It's the first time that I'm finally doing something for me. And I need the secret to be able to know, because if it's totally secretive, I know that it's mine. Everything else I do in my life is for others, or at least so she feels. That is not a theme you hear so much in men. In the men that live with women, you will hear, you will more hear, actually the men that live with men too, you will hear more of the theme of I need to connect. Now, they don't use the language I need to connect, because men have been given the license to talk about all those things through the language of sex. When they talk about sex, it's code language for talking about tenderness and affection and closeness and desire and lovemaking and pleasure, and all of that goes in there. You know, but it has one 3-letter word that is the one language they're allowed to have. Yeah.
One more question, and then we have to round up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, it's fabulous to have you here. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. In 3D.
The volcano is welcome to Stockholm.
It's really fabulous. And I'm curious to bring this focus to the other side. Have you, has there been many or any people who have come to you, have you talked to them or advised them on their lover or mistress or third party with the married person or monogamous person?
Right.
We say we want this attraction, tension, traveling to places, novelty and all that, sexuality and eroticism. But this married person don't want to hurt the wife or husband. And how can we keep it? Is it possible to sort of still respect the third or the married other side?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's basically, how long can you have an affair before everything falls apart?
I'm just curious.
That's what you're asking.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I can say it nicer. You know, what are the consequences of having a parallel relationship? It depends. If the parallel relationship is known, you know, it can even be a don't ask, don't tell strategy, in which, you know, I know this couple, they're in their 80s. I know both of them have their long-standing lovers of probably 20, 30 years each. They have a whole life, and then they have their little rendezvous that each of them hasn't, you know. And they are, and they both know it, but they don't ask. You know, that's one model. You know, and I watch them because I happen to know them personally, and so I can ask, and I know it's long-standing. This is different than I have a secret from my partner, And I have this 5, 10, 15-year relationship on the side with somebody else. I believe that secrets are like mushrooms. They grow. You know, at first you don't answer, where were you yesterday? Then you don't answer, where were you between 6 and 8? Because if you have to answer about 6 and 8, then you have to also account for 4 to 6. And so you start to live with a kind of an envelope around you, a buffer of all the stuff that you no longer talk about because you never know where it could lead. And you slowly dissociate inside your own house. You walk, it's like, you know, when you walk the streets and you're thinking of somebody, you can be here without knowing where you are because you're completely absorbed somewhere else. You know, and I hear these stories all the time. It's like they're in their kitchen, but they're not there. They're physically there, but they're not present. They're dissociated. At some point, the fracture, after years of this. Now, the people don't believe that. When they talk to you, they think they manage it very well. Just so you understand, this is not their perception of themselves, but everybody around them. You know, when you used to live with people who were closeted and you felt something, but you could never put your finger on it. I mean, there's less of them today around me because more people come out younger. But I remember friends of mine who were married 10 years before they came out. And I was always like, there's something about that person that just you couldn't, you know, they would hug you, but there was this thing in the hug. There was something, but you didn't think about it because it's a conspiracy and everybody was colluded in the silence about it. Then when it comes out, everybody goes, mais bien sûr, you know, of course. Okay, this is some of that. At some point, it's very, very painful because when you talk to these people about giving this up, they feel like they're going into a casket. It's like death. And they feel that the only reason they have all of this is because of this lover. It's the third person that infuses them in them. And there is very little that is really written about the grief and the mourning that takes place in giving up a lover. And I think it's a major part of the work that I do is that you learn to integrate it, that you take it with you. You actually realize that it's inside of you. And what is it like to write that letter? Because you have to end an affair with integrity too. It's not just about, you know, that person that's been waiting. Sometimes that person has been waiting and hoping. Because every time you say, I will come, you just will never come. You may never come because what you need is that duality. It is those two relationships that you live off. And the other one depends if the third person has another relationship too or is alone with you. Is it a triangle or a quad?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If they don't have the intention of them divorcing.
Depends if the person on the other side is happy that you don't want to, because I don't have any intention either. I mean, come in, how many times has one person finally left their partner and then the other one disappears the next morning? That's not what they wanted. That's what they were talking about in the afterglow, but that's not what they wanted. But when they are alone, and that's what they've been waiting for, it's a different story. And sometimes you have to have the courage to leave your partner so that they can have a chance to have another life too. You know, and there is no choice without loss. That's what grown-up life is about. It's a terrible note to end, right? Yeah. I have to give you something more hopeful.
Let's repeat what we started with when you said that this book, you have written this book for anyone who has ever loved. Mm-hmm. It's really a book about love, not necessarily of infidelity, because of course infidelity is also love. So this is very important for all of us, and this is what I felt.
I add one other thing, Dorothea. I would say that if you want to know how to have a good relationship, you want to read a book about what can break in a relationship.
Yes, that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to give you one last question, because I would like to finish with the future, with some hope or some impressions you can give us about the young people who are surprisingly, to me, a very, very vast group of people who actually listen to your podcast, who contact you. And I was amazed to hear that many of them are in their early 20s. So you could imagine, I have been imagining that, of course, I mean, people talking and thinking of relationships are people who are maybe our age, middle age, who have been through a number of relationships, who want to know how to handle the ones they have and see the patterns. But the 21 years old, they haven't been there yet, but they are addicted to your podcast. They are addicted to advice. So it's fascinating to hear you talking about it. I've heard it a few times. I want much more of it, but a short version. Please, Esther.
I mean, I discovered that it was the young people that were listening actually after the first TED Talk. It's 25 million people that have listened to the 2 TED Talks. And I thought, that's so interesting. And it was somebody I met in an airport, and he said, all my friends are listening to it. I'm like, you know. But then my son said, so I have 2 boys, 22 and 25. I have a 35-year-old marriage. And one of my kids said to me last week, which I thought was really interesting, Maman, I need to have 2 more girlfriends, and then I'm going to get my shit together. I think by then I will really learn to deal with issues, and I will develop the maturity that I will be ready to actually live with somebody. I'm like, two more, but he's had them since he's one who needs a relationship, and they last a year, 2 years, but he's pretty much been at this since he's 16. He's 25, you know, and he's kind of working himself out in the context of relationships, which I think is the accurate thing. You discover yourself in the presence of another. Podcast, because it is the medium of young people. Simply, you know, half the time we don't even know, my generation, where it is on the phone. I mean, there's a certain kind of digital dexterity that comes with listening to podcasts. So it is a generational thing. Next, I think that what people hear and tell me, I mean, we know through Google Analytics how much people listen, how long they listen, how many episodes they listen. That 40% of the listeners are men, which is unheard of for a relationship podcast. It's not what people imagine. And how old they are and where they come from, etc., etc. So, you know, Big Brother is watching you. And what there is also is that, you know, today you can have 1,000 virtual friends, but nobody to feed your cat. Today you can lie and present fake news on social media non-stop about how lucky and happy you are, and nobody really knows what goes on in your life. Your friend come and tell you they're breaking up, you didn't even see it coming. So this hunger for authentic conversations, where does truth lie at this moment? I mean, lie as in, you know, where do I hear the real story? What is it like in the backstage of another couple? And to be invited into that space that is not patience, there are people who applied, it's thousands of people who applied, but it's also not fiction. It's a real session. It feels to people like they're touching truth. This is the real shit, you know, and they listen to that. They are really, really hungry for that. And then the difficult conversation. How do you actually talk about this stuff? You know, how do 2 men talk about this? You know, and how they learn never, you know, what does it mean when you say I'm touched? And it's not just physical touch, it's emotional touch as well. And I think that's part of why the generational divide. And it's honest, it's not judgmental, it's inclusive. It implies straight, gay, trans, you know, of all backgrounds. It's not just New Yorkers. Audible pays for them, so they are of all classes and all backgrounds, often coming to New York for the first time in their life. And so, and people hear that. You hear it in the language that it's not always just, you know, educated urbanites type thing. That is a major attraction. And then, because of this digital, and it's free. It's free. Therapy is expensive. You know, it's free. And, you know, the second country, by the way, that listens to the podcast the most is Nigeria. Go figure. Nigeria, what the fuck am I doing in Nigeria? You know? I look at the numbers this week. You know, I can tell you how many people have listened in Sweden. I know it's a strange thing. But so now I know Abu Dhabi. You know, I know that there is a whole world where people have no access to any of this. And this is education entering into your ear without nobody knowing that you're actually consuming it or learning it. And that is power. Education, information, knowledge that you can acquire even though the system wants you to remain dumb and ignorant.
Wonderful. We stop here, but what I hear is that there definitely is hope with the young people because they are really interested in having good relationship. It's important for them, and it's wonderful that what they can learn from you. Thank you for all this. It's been fascinating, and I think that everybody here who hasn't been listening to your podcast is going to run and start listening to it. But
I write like I speak, so when you read me, you hear me.
This is true. So you can instead, or you can do both, of course. Read this book, Kärlekskris, now sold for a very, very accessible price. It's really about love and how to avoid crisis. This is how I perceive the book, and this is why I felt it's so fun to read it. And also we have a mass market edition of Mating in Captivity, which is focused on long relationships. A book that's really made it for me fascinating, both of them. And if you want to hear more of Esther, it's just to push the button tomorrow and listen and see Skavlan, or see it, of course, at SVT Play. And there will come much more of Esther.
Can we get the first
slide back? Is going to have a big interview very soon, on Sunday, I think, Greta. And there will be a lot of other things coming very soon. So Esther is here. We are very happy to have had you, and very privileged.
This is a complicated thing.
Something is going on, so I have to say we have to stop because we want you to sign a few books, and we are supposed to leave the bookshop quite soon.
What I was going to give you is the handles. Just join me on any of the social channels.
Yes.
Voilà.
Now we get the information as well.
Yes.
So a big applause for Esther Perel.